This week we're going to be working with aggregate functions, which will give us more meaningful data about our entire table. Rather than looking at one record at a time, now we can look at groups of records and derive meaningful information about those groups. Microsoft defines aggregate functions as such. Aggregate functions perform a calculation on a set of values and return a single value. That means, ideally we would be using a column, but we could also use a calculation. And an aggregate function will take all the values we provide in that set and do something with it depending on the function itself. Aside from count, aggregate functions ignore null values. What that means is, like in the case of average, it will total up the values, but it won't count the null values. So if you have nulls and you have 10 values, and say you have 2 nulls, it will add up all your values and then divide it by 8 rather than 10. Same thing occurs for minimum and maximum, because minimum and maximum will totally ignore null and give you just an actual value without including nulls in its set for the test. Count will include nulls in that it will only count records that are not null, so it considers nulls to be a zero or a false check, and non-nulls to be a true when counting up columns. Count can also be used to check how many records there are. If you use an asterisk, it will count all records. So I'm starting from a reload of the refresh script from Blackboard. So I'm just going to, again, content categories, case files and scripts, mmorpg.com, grabbing the refresh script, and I'm going to open it. I think I've recently opened it, so I'm going to, there we go. I'm going to hit execute on the entire file, nothing highlight. Close it up, refresh my tables here, and refresh my IntelliSense here. Alright, so dealing with aggregate functions, and these are min, max, average, sum, and count. There are others, but we won't be needing them this term because they deal with more statistical things than we have the data to cover. But their usage is essentially the same. If we wanted to check how many records we have in the database, actually we'll be looking at that soon. So, all right. So using aggregates, we can answer questions like these. If we were to play all of our games, what would our total monthly fee be? Well, let's do a select star from game. All right, where am I storing fee? Well, fee's over here in this. So what we want to do is add together all of the fees. We don't want the minimum, we don't want the maximum, we don't want the average, and we're not counting the number of fees that we have, because then we would just get 17. What we want is to total up the values of all of those fees, so instead we are going to use sum, and we're going to say sum game fee. And that'll tell us the total cost, so we would have to spend almost $90 a month to play all of those games monthly. Now you'll also notice we don't have a column name, and just as a reminder, when you don't, make sure that you have some sort of a column name here using the aliasing system. So just put an as and then give it a name. Note that yes, you can use other formats such as putting square brackets. I'm going to show you one way. If you know the other ways and you can get it done right, then go for it. You can see now I've got a column header. All right, what's the highest rating in our list? Select max. Max goes with highest. Game rating from game. Notice it's not case sensitive. Highest rating is 8.58. But I've also got no column name. So let's call it as highest rating. How many games are on our list? We get how many with a count. So as let's call it num games. So I counted 17. Now these are just some simple examples. We've just grabbed some and so on. I'd like to just point out that if I tried to say select the maximum game rating. Well, maybe I also want to know what game that was. I put in game name, and suddenly I hit an error here. And the error says it's invalid because it's not contained in an aggregate function or the group by clause. We are going to learn about the group by clause a little later this week. For now, I'm not going to go into it, but suffice it to say that game name, the field name by itself cannot exist without using this group by clause that we'll learn about. And that only occurs when you're using aggregate functions or the group by clause already. So all fields must have. So say you want to put like a count around game name, that would be legal. That would be fine. But we can't put it out there by itself because now we're grouping together rows of data and it doesn't know which game name to pull out without us giving it a little more instruction. We will learn subqueries also probably next week or the week afterwards, and that will be how we get information from our derived maxes and mins and that sort of thing. So let's find out what the average fee for fantasy games is that were released between years 1995 and 2015. This just gives me an opportunity to talk about something. Start from game. You'll notice that I say released between the years 1995 and 2015. Keeping in mind that anytime you have data in one of our databases that we're working with, it can only be considered sample data. There's probably going to be other data in a live database, and you need to treat it like you can't see all the data that's there. And in fact, you need to treat it like you don't actually see any of this information. This is just used for us to check. We need to write queries that are robust and can handle any data that's thrown at them, even if we don't see the data ahead of time. So when you look at these release dates, you'll notice that all of these release dates are already between the years 1995 and 2015. But just because they already are doesn't mean we shouldn't include them in the criteria. So please make sure to include all criteria mentioned in any query, challenges, questions, or practice. So what we're going to be doing is getting the average fee, but I'll just get all games that are there first of all. Now we're looking for games that are released between two dates. Well, there's a couple of ways we can do this. We can say game release date is greater than, and it's the year 1995 and 2015. Well, let's say we include it. So 1995, and game release date is less than, what's that, 12/31, because it's December 31st, 2015, right? Now I've got to switch these around to use our proper ISO here. So year, month, day instead. Alright, so that'll work for getting all of our games, except that you'll notice that the null release dates don't get included. That's because we don't really know whether they're between those two dates, so they get excluded from our information. That's okay. That's one way to do it, and I don't think it's the best way to do it. There's also the between operator. We can kind of shorthand this. Instead of saying this and this, we can take this bit out and we can change it to game release date is between those two, and if we run it we should get the same results. And then finally there's probably the best option. We're looking at years. We have 1995 and 2015. These are safe assumptions, but I would probably say let's get just the year information from our game release date. That's a built-in function. You can also use date part year. Both of them mean the same thing. I prefer the shorthand because it's a little easier to read. And then I can type in the years directly, 1995 and 2015. Now when I run it again, I get the same information. So I've confirmed that all my release dates are in the right place. I've confirmed just about everything. Let's reread our question. Average fee for fantasy games. Wait a minute, it says for fantasy games. Watch out for those. Just because it's not necessarily kind of obvious, sometimes there's going to be little bits of the question you need to include. So we're going to say where it's between those dates and the game genre is equal to fantasy. So you can see my list gets quite a bit shorter, and now when I get my average fee from these, it should add up these game fees and then divide it by 7 records. So I do an average game fee, run that, I get one piece of information back. Let's give it an as and say as average fee. Okay. Now because it's money, I don't really like the fact that it has the extra decimal places here, so we might format it as currency.